The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. The words are now, it's made with good intentions.
I still remember how to start recording on Zoom, so that's fantastic. It's been a few weeks. Welcome to 1 of 200. We're back for a penultimate episode for the year after I swore off recording anything further. There's too much ludicrous stuff happening coming into the year end, and we've got some great co-hosts to help me attempt to pick it apart and create some order among the chaos. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Kia ora.
Can you give a quick intro? What kind of intro can you give here?
Every Monday or Tuesday for the last 3 weeks, the government has unleashed a set of reforms. Each week a new reform, which have the cumulative impact of being hit over the head by a snow shovel each week, like the robbers at the end of Home Alone.
That's fantastic.
That's probably where we are. And all of these are due to kick in very, very soon. And the consultations are open now and are closing while everyone is still on holiday, which gives you an indication about exactly how much scrutiny they are going to have.
And we're also joined by Mark. Welcome back, Mark.
Kia ora. It's nice to be here, but I just got to echo what John said about being hit over the head with this stuff. It's probably where my introduction would come from too. I've been observing the development of neoliberalism in this country for a long time, and I think I have some sort of big picture take on what is going on at the moment, because I think it is very significant. And in the media, we've seen a lot of references to 1989 and the RMA reforms, sort of harking back to that time. So it is a kind of point to reflect on all of that stuff.
So this evening, we're going to be talking about a range of the kind of local government regionalization reforms, stuff like water, the RMA, as Mark just mentioned, rates cap stuff, and topping it off, or it's all going to try and thread together. I don't actually know how we're going to draw a line here, but topping it off with the big mega ministry that's just been announced that kind of gathers a range of things which maybe shouldn't be going together in one big ministry. If you want to deliver outcomes.
The Ministry of Cities, Environment, Regions and Transport.
Yay.
Nuts and gum together at last.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of people are, as has been prefaced, feel like they've been hit over the head with a snow shovel. Like, what does this even mean? These are such big changes. These are just too big almost to try and piece something together which is narratively coherent. I don't even think the minister, Chris Bishop, who is being planned to helm this ministry, is able to communicate exactly what the reasons for it are. Certainly, they haven't been trying to anyway, and rushing this through at the end of the year to avoid that scrutiny and those questions seems certainly to be a part of the strategy. This all kicked off, though, I guess all the way back in pre-2023, when the Labour government was starting to work on water reform under the name Three Waters. Big racist campaign. We talked about it on the podcast a number of times before the 2023 election, and then passed it as well, with groups like the Taxpayers Union running road shows to attack the Three Waters reforms for giving Māori a vote on it, having Māori representation, and running out this line that we've heard all over the world when Indigenous rights are being attacked around it should be one person, one vote. National won the election, scrapped the reforms. That was after Labour had already kind of stepped back for it and called it something else to be more racist about it, to try and maintain their voting base. And then National realised, wait a fucking second, we actually do need water reforms because everything's broken, and no local, or very few local governments are actually able to afford to fund a revitalization or like an infrastructure project to put in new pipes, to put in new stormwater, and especially in the face of things like climate change. John, do you want to pick up from here to give us like some technical rundown around what's developed since then, I guess, or catch any of the things that I've missed in terms of important details?
Okay, so the year is 2016, and some sheep have an inadvertent role in determining nearly a decade of proposed water reform, increased standards and regulation up in Havelock North, where a lot of people get sick, a few people die, and cross-party, because we're talking 2016, so this is key government start doing all these commissions and inquiries, and they come up with some recommendations, and they say, holy shit, why are you letting the health department manage water quality in this country? They're not very good at it. And that's true, they weren't. What you need to do is put in a water regulator and increase your water standards. And this is actually the one thing which, regardless of the Three Waters campaign and the reforms, is actually in effect. There is a water services regulator. It's called Taumata Arawai, but you've got to call it the water service regulator first because the government's racist. But those standards are pretty much unchanged from Labour through National, because there is a cross-party consensus that we desperately need to fix the water system in this country because it is not good.
Let's not have people die from drinking water out of the tap.
Yes, and also water assets are almost wholly owned by local authorities, which means they are under the political control of a group of usually 50 plus white men who have got into power promising to keep rates down, which means deferring work and deferring it a bit more and just doing some repairs when you should be doing replacement because it's expensive and you don't want to put the rates up. Now, you can only kick a can so far until it stops being a can. And that's kind of the point that New Zealand has reached in many ways. Everyone talks about Wellington and its problems, but most water networks around the country have similar issues with wastage, with leakage in the ground, things like that. So there is this set of increasing standards over time that people are having to meet, and the financial penalties are quite severe. So National get in saying we will repeal and replace Three Waters. And that's their tent pole for the election, isn't it? That's the real red meat to go, we're going to get rid of the Three Waters, we're going to replace them. Okay, they repeal it. February 24, they start on the replacement stuff. They finish that legislation in August of this year, about 2 weeks before all of the councils have to submit their water services plans to tell the government what they're doing. The best way I could describe the government's water reforms is that they are a spectacular failure, and it's incredible, but I am agreeing with Michael Laws on this, friend of the show. Michael Laws has said this reform has failed because instead of having 67 councils with their own water services, anyone at home who's just gone 6-7, please delete yourself. 67 councils with their own water networks, we now have 43. That does not get the efficiencies that are required of it. Labour started out with 4 for the whole country, and then when they got scared, they then 10 for the whole country. We're now at 43. The economies of scale rely on 50,000 connections. Almost none of these proposed water entities have that number, which means it is going to cost people more. And I just want to be really clear on this. There is no future where water charges do not at least double in the next decade for everyone. There is no way to avoid it at least doubling, but the efficiencies in the following decade are what stop it from tripling or quadrupling. However, that hasn't happened. And unfortunately, because of the way these reforms have been put together, in that they've had this cloak of localism, saying, no, we'll let communities decide. Communities went, well, we want to keep our water because we don't want to give it to Maori or the council up the road or those guys, or we don't want it privatised. Which, fair enough, but it doesn't solve the problem. Okay, you're going to end up with 43 either in-house water things that are going to be regulated by the Commerce Commission. Water is going to become one of the most highly regulated fields in the country. And that's good, but not for the user, because water is also it's incredible, really. Power is obviously done like privatized, 51% generation and all that by the government. All that, fine. Roads, 57-43 between the government and your local authorities. Water is 100% on ratepayers. And there are billions of dollars that need to be spent in the next decade, and then billions in the decade after that. And you've got to get that from your ratepayers, who are already squeezed so tightly in a system where apparently there's no money left. So Does this work? No, but the way it's not going to work is going to be extremely painful unless the government decide to intervene, which they don't want to do because that's what Labour did. So that's fun.
What a great starting point. What does that mean in terms of implementation then? So, one of the interesting decisions this year was to have a lot of that water reform stuff and those decisions around rates, and how it's going to be delivered by local authorities drop just before the local elections. But if, as you say, this stuff is inevitable, like it's going to have to be done. So I'm like, for people listening at home, I'm just staring blankly because I can't really think my way out of this one.
No, there isn't a way to think your way out of it. It is a this is what's going to happen. The national-led government are more than happy with this, and I also believe that Labour are quite satisfied with it as well, because within the current settings are the mechanisms to force amalgamate these organisations in a few years' time. You know, because when the Commerce Commission starts saying you can't actually afford to do this while keeping it affordable for your users and maintaining your debt levels, at that point, the state will step in and say, you guys need to get the efficiencies that X or Y have got. And the only way you can do that is by amalgamation. It's going to be, we gave you a chance to run it yourselves. You fucked it. Now it's time for us to make you do something a bit more sensible. And it doesn't matter if it's Chris Hipkins doing it or Chris Luxon doing it. It's probably going to have to happen. And it's whether or not they decide to do it before the ratepayer starts screaming about it.
Like, let me like get this straight. They set them up to fail so that they would fail, and when they fail, they say, "You fucked up."
No. What I think is they went in really naively and thought all of these councils will operate in the best interests of our policy.
Oh, I don't know if
And
it's better or worse.
the settings for making a plan were relatively legislatively loose. And when it came, these plans all stacked up, the money all worked, which means it became incredibly hard to reject them, even if they're not doing what you wanted them to. You actually don't have a way to say no. But again, this is because the repeal of the water services, the repeal of the three waters was in February 2024. They laid down the legislation which set up how to make a plan in June 24, and it was passed on September the 3rd, 24. This was extremely fast legislation, which in the final water services omnibus bill, which was divided into two parts in the end because it was like 700 pages long or something like that, that bill made amendments to the bill they passed like 3 months before they put that bill down. Okay? They were making this law up by the seat of their pants. And when they passed that first legislation in September 2024, every council in the country had 1 year to deliver a compliant plan. The legislation guiding the regulation, standards, and all the other stuff wasn't produced or wasn't published until December 2024 and wasn't actually passed into law until 2 weeks before the deadline for plans. So, yeah, they have made this law extremely fast because they promised people they would repeal and replace. But what it has delivered is not what they wanted, which could be best described as we need councils to build three waters without Maori themselves in a year. And when now that hasn't happened, it's, oh, fuck. What do we do now? But the
So,
answer is the other reforms that have come out in the last few weeks.
yeah, and that's kind of where it takes us into some of this stuff around regional reorganization, right? Because the kind of red meat, apart from the racism, of the repeal and replace for Three Waters was about local control. But they're definitely not setting up people to have local control. Like there were ways for that to happen, but if, as you say, like they're going to be forced to amalgamate, then it's going to be a little bit of a comms battle to say, oh, it's actually their fault and not ours. That brings us into the regional reorganization that was announced, what, 2 months ago?
2 weeks ago.
Oh my God, no.
Yeah, so it's been a lot
What?
in mostly late November and December, if I am correct.
Like this week was MCERT, the week before was the RMA, the week before that was regional reorganization, no, was rates
Christ.
capping, and the week
Yeah.
before
So it was a
that
month ago.
was, oh yeah, it might have been a month ago. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, like thick and fast, man, thick and fast.
How does this come out of I am going to call it a fuck up, around the water reform attempt?
If anything, it's because it's all ass backwards, frankly. I mean, like putting on my Phil hat here, you got to hand it to them. There is a way to make all of these reforms work, okay? But it's not doing it this way round. And it gives the sense of not so much like a bad strategy, but just chaos. So ideally what you'd do is you'd reform your regions first. Like nobody likes their regional council, let's be honest. It's what do I pay my regional council rates for? Blah, 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 blah. And the way that they comms around this was quite clever in that we're getting rid of the regional councils, and everyone went, yay! And then no one looked at part two, which was, and all of your councils within these regions are going to have to work on shared services plans for regional roading authorities, one-stop shops for building, shared CCOs, and things like that. Potential amalgamation of smaller councils. That's all in what they said on the day, but it got missed and was only reported on about 4 days later when no one was paying attention because everyone was going, yay, no regional council rates, which is going to be a really big shock next year when they all have to pay regional council rates. Oh, I thought these guys were abolished. No, not yet. So this regional council thing is, it's about a longer term amalgamation, and it sets some boundaries of control. And there are questions about democratic representation. Say, if you had a Canterbury Regional Council, how would that work? Would you have a North Canterbury like unitary, a Christchurch super city, which has Waimakariri and all that, and then a South Canterbury one based out of, I don't know, Selwyn, Timaru, maybe? Because you couldn't just have one for the whole of Canterbury. But what the government again have done, like they've done with Waters, is go, that's up to you guys to work out. You make the plan over 2 years, then you give it to us, and we will check it. And if it's good, we'll give it a big tick. We might ask you to make some changes, or we might appoint someone to do your plan for you. It's exactly the same framework as local water done well, down to the language in the console document is the same about local choice. But there are much bigger questions here because this isn't just about who's fixing the pipes. This is about who's representing you locally and how does that work, which
Because
is
because one of the big, I don't know, like red flags is, okay, we're going to go from regional councils to the mayors just sitting together. And I feel like New Zealand's mayors are some of the worst people in the country. And I'm not sure that like that's the best way to get good representation. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
Well,
that's a
it does
terrible
depend on the boundaries, doesn't it? I think it's exactly what John says is about how do you divide it up, because that is really going to determine the sort of the influences. And it's going to be the same people involved in this sort of going forward. Maybe I can talk about that more when we talk about mega ministries. But I think like Canterbury is an interesting case in particular because it's a very large region, sort of geographically. And it's sort of both very separate and also very kind of grouped together, and has this backstory of ECAN and the sort of Stephen Joyce, John Key, anti-democratic chaos that happened a few years back, which is still a real sore point. And I think I think it's Newsroom published a piece on they had their last regional council meeting for the year a couple of days ago, and it was utter chaos because we're talking about being hit over the head with this stuff. These are people who are just like actually like basically receiving these messages directly from the government, and the future is very up in the air, and so they're sitting there having massive arguments about whether they should do anything or not, and whether they should make the decisions that they came into the room to make the decisions on, or to defer it to next year, and it sort of spiraled into total chaos. And I just thought that was a sort of a real indication, I guess, of like one situation that both has a lot to say about kind of water, but also just maybe what is going to ripple out over the whole country. And this is just a more kind of public and visible level of it because the negotiation between water users in Canterbury and the authorities is very intense and very controversial. And I feel like that's just a sort of a good sort of indication of like it's not just about the residents in the metropolitan areas and the questions around water metering, which is another thing we didn't really talk about that, but something that New Zealand just doesn't do. People have sort of been against it for I don't know why for decades. I think Auckland is perhaps the place where things have developed a little bit more rationally over the years. So perhaps Auckland is going to, and water care is going to be the gold standard, and perhaps not. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with a lot of those details, but I think there's a lot of shocks coming to the system around how do things like that get rolled out. But then, as I was saying, we have this situation of these private landowners who have huge demands on like water, and there's irrigation and there's rivers and watersheds and all of this sort of land use that's all connected. And so you can see like even just trying to describe it is really difficult and complicated. But I think we are sort of grappling with trying to put all of this together because water is the common kind of thread of life that goes through all communities, and it is all connected. And it's very fascinating that that's such a component of the traditional.
The tummy substance equals spin. The propaganda's a win. Stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words are now. It's made with good intentions.
I still remember how to start recording on Zoom, so that's fantastic. It's been a few weeks. Welcome to 1 of 200. We're back for a penultimate episode for the year after I swore off recording anything further. There's too much ludicrous stuff happening coming into the year end, and we've got some great co-hosts to help me attempt to pick it apart and create some order among the chaos. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Kia ora.
Can you give a quick intro? What kind of intro can you give here?
Every Monday or Tuesday for the last 3 weeks, the government has unleashed a set of reforms. Each week, a new reform, which have the cumulative impact of being hit over the head by a snow shovel each week, like the robbers at the end of Home Alone.
That's fantastic.
That's probably where we are, and all of these are due to kick in very, very soon. And the consultations are open now and are closing while everyone is still on holiday, which gives you an indication about exactly how much scrutiny they are going to have.
And we're also joined by Mark. Welcome back, Mark.
Kia ora. It's nice to be here, but I just got to echo what John said about being hit over the head with this stuff. It's probably where my introduction would come from too. I've been observing the development of neoliberalism in this country for a long time, and I think I have some sort of big picture take on what is going on at the moment because I think it is very significant. And in the media, we've seen a lot of references to 1989 and the RMA reforms, sort of harking back to that time. So it is a kind of point to reflect on all of that stuff.
So this evening, we're going to be talking about a range of the kind of local government regionalization reforms, stuff like water, the RMA, as Mark just mentioned, rates cap stuff, and topping it off, or it's all going to try and thread together. I don't actually know how we're going to draw a line here, but topping it off with the big mega ministry that's just been announced that kind of gathers a range of things which maybe shouldn't be going together in one big ministry if you want to deliver outcomes.
The Ministry of Cities, Environment, Regions and Transport.
Yay.
Nuts and gum together at last.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of people are, as has been prefaced, feel like we've been hit over the head with a snow shovel. Like, what does this even mean? These are such big changes. These are just too big almost to try and piece something together which is narratively coherent. I don't even think the minister, Chris Bishop, who is being planned to helm this ministry, is able to communicate exactly what the reasons for it are. Certainly, they haven't been trying to anyway, and rushing us through at the end of the year to avoid that scrutiny and those questions seems certainly to be a part of the strategy. This all kicked off, though, I guess all the way back in Pre-2023, when the Labour government was starting to work on water reform under the name Three Waters. Big racist campaign. We talked about it on the podcast a number of times before the 2023 election and then passed it as well, with groups like the Taxpayers Union running road shows to attack the Three Waters reforms for giving Maori a vote on it, having Maori representation, and running out this line that we've heard all over the world when Indigenous rights are being attacked around it should be one person, one vote. National won the election, scrapped the reforms. That was after Labour had already kind of like stepped back for it and called it something else to be more racist about it, to try and maintain their voting base. And the National realized, wait a fucking second. We actually do need water reforms because everything's broken and no local or very few local governments are actually able to afford to fund a revitalization or like an infrastructure project to put in new pipes, to put in new stormwater, and especially in the face of things like climate change. John, do you want to pick up from here to give us like some technical rundown
Okay.
around what's developed since then, I guess, or catch any of the things that I've missed in terms of important details?
Okay, so the year is 2016, and some sheep have an inadvertent role in determining nearly a decade of proposed water reform, increased standards and regulation up in Havelock North, where a lot of people get sick, a few people die, and cross-party, because we're talking 2016, so this is key government, start doing all these commissions and inquiries, and they come up with some recommendations, and they say, holy shit, why are you letting the health department manage water quality in this country? They're not very good at it. And that's true, they weren't. What you need to do is put in a water regulator and increase your water standards. And this is actually the one thing which, regardless of the Three Waters campaign and the reforms, is actually in effect. There is a water services regulator. It's called Taumata Arawai, but you've got to call it the water service regulator first because the government's racist. But those standards are pretty much unchanged from Labour through National, because there is a cross-party consensus that we desperately need to fix the water system in this country because it is not good.
Let's not have people die from drinking water out of the tap.
Yes, and also water assets are almost wholly owned by local authorities, which means they are under the political control of a group of usually 50 plus white men who have got into power promising to keep rates down, which means deferring work and deferring it a bit more and just doing some repairs when you should be doing replacement because it's expensive and you don't want to put the rates up. Now, you can only kick a can so far until it stops being a can. And that's kind of the point that New Zealand has reached in many ways. Everyone talks about Wellington and its problems, but most water networks around the country have similar issues with wastage, with leakage in the ground, things like that. So there is this set of increasing standards over time that people are having to meet, and the financial penalties are quite severe. So National get in saying we will repeal and replace Three Waters. And that's their tent pole for the election, isn't it? That's the real red meat to go, we're going to get rid of the Three Waters, we're going to replace them. Okay, they repeal it. February 24, they start on the replacement stuff. They finish that legislation in August of this year, about 2 weeks before all of the councils have to submit their water services plans to tell the government what they're doing. The best way I could describe the government's water reforms is that they are a spectacular failure, and it's incredible, but I am agreeing with Michael Laws on this, friend of the show. Michael Laws has said this reform has failed because instead of having 67 councils with their own water services, anyone at home who's just gone 6-7, please delete yourself. 67 councils with their own water networks. We now have 43. That does not get the efficiencies that are required of it. Labour started out with 4 for the whole country, and then when they got scared, they then 10 for the whole country. We're now at 43. The economies of scale rely on 50,000 connections. Almost none of these proposed water entities have that number, which means it is going to cost people more. And I just want to be really clear on this. There is no future where water charges do not at least double in the next decade for everyone. There is no way to avoid it at least doubling, but the efficiencies in the following decade are what stop it from tripling or quadrupling. However, that hasn't happened. And unfortunately, because of the way these reforms have been put together, in that they've had this cloak of localism, saying, no, no, we'll let communities decide. Communities went, well, we want to keep our water because we don't want to give it to Maori or the council up the road or those guys, or we don't want it privatized, which, fair enough, but it doesn't solve the problem. Okay, you're going to end up with 43 either in-house water things that are going to be regulated by the Commerce Commission. Water is going to become one of the most highly regulated fields in the country. And that's good, but not for the user, because water is also it's incredible, really. Power is obviously done like privatized, 51% generation and all that by the government. All that, fine. Roads, 57-43 between the government and your local authorities. Water is 100% on ratepayers. And there are billions of dollars that need to be spent in the next decade, and then billions in the decade after that. And you've got to get that from your ratepayers, who are already squeezed so tightly in a system where apparently there's no money left. So, does this work? No, but the way it's not going to work is going to be extremely painful unless the government decide to intervene, which they don't want to do because that's what Labour did. So, that's fun.
What a great starting point. What does that mean in terms of implementation then? So, one of the interesting decisions this year was to have a lot of that water reform stuff and those decisions around rates and how it's going to be delivered by local authorities drop just before the local elections. But if, as you say, this stuff is inevitable, like it's going to have to be done. So I'm like, for people listening at home, I'm just staring blankly because I can't really think my way out of this one.
No, there isn't a way to think your way out of it. This is what's going to happen. The national government, the national-led government are more than happy with this. And I also believe that Labour are quite satisfied with it as well, because within the current settings are the mechanisms to force amalgamate these organisations in a few years' time. You know? Because when the Commerce Commission starts saying you can't actually afford to do this while keeping it affordable for your users and maintaining your debt levels, at that point, the state will step in and say, you guys need to get the efficiencies that X or Y have got. And the only way you can do that is by amalgamation. It's going to be, we gave you a chance to run it yourselves. You fucked it. Now it's time for us to make you do something a bit more sensible. And it doesn't matter if it's Chris Hipkins doing it or Chris Luxon doing it. It's probably going to have to happen. And it's whether or not they decide to do it before the ratepayer starts screaming about it.
Like, let me like get this straight. They set them up to fail so that they would fail, and when they fail, they say, "You fucked up."
No. What I think is they went in really naively and thought all of these councils will operate in the best interests of our policy.
Oh, I don't know if
And
it's better or worse.
the settings for making a plan were relatively legislatively loose. And when it came, these plans all stacked up, the money all worked, which means it became incredibly hard to reject them, even if they're not doing what you wanted them to. You actually don't have a way to say no. But again, this is because the repeal of the water services, the repeal of the three waters was in February 2024. They laid down the legislation which set up how to make a plan in June 24, and it was passed on September the 3rd, 24. This was extremely fast legislation, which in the final Water Services Omnibus Bill, which was divided into two parts in the end because it was like 700 pages long or something like that, that bill made amendments to the bill they passed like 3 months before they put that bill down. Okay? They were making this law up by the seat of their pants. And when they passed that first legislation in September 2024, every council in the country had 1 year to deliver a compliant plan. The legislation guiding the regulation, standards, and all the other stuff wasn't produced or wasn't published until December 2024 and wasn't actually passed into law until 2 weeks before the deadline for plans. So, yeah, they have made this law extremely fast because they promised people they would repeal and replace. But what it has delivered is not what they wanted, which could be best described as we need councils to build 3 waters without Maori themselves in a year. And now that hasn't happened, it's, oh, fuck, what do we do now? But the answer is the other reforms that have come out in the last few weeks.
Yeah. And that's kind of where it takes us into some of this stuff around regional reorganization, right? Because the kind of red meat, apart from the racism, of the repeal and replace for 3 waters was about local control. But they're definitely not setting up people to have local control. Like there were ways for that to happen, but if, as you say, like they're going to be forced to amalgamate, then it's going to be a little bit of a comms battle to say, oh, it's actually their fault and not ours. That brings us into the regional reorganization that was announced, what, 2 months ago?
2 weeks ago.
Oh my God, no.
Yeah, so it's been a lot,
What?
and mostly late November and December, if I am correct.
Right, this week was MCERT. The week before was the RMA. The week before that was regional reorganization. No, it was
Christ.
rates capping. And the
Yeah.
week before
So it
that
was a month ago.
Oh yeah, it might have been a month ago. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. Like thick and fast, man. Thick and fast.
How does this come out of I am going to call it a fuck up, around the water reform attempt?
If anything, it's because it's all ass backwards, frankly. I mean, like putting on my Phil hat here, you got to hand it to them. There is a way to make all of these reforms work, okay? But it's not doing it this way round. And it gives the sense of not so much a bad strategy, but just chaos. So ideally what you'd do is you'd reform your regions first. Like nobody likes their regional council, let's be honest. It's what do I pay my regional council rates for? Blah, 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 blah. And the way that they comms around this was quite clever in that we're getting rid of the regional councils. And everyone went, yay! And then no one looked at part 2, which was, and all of your councils within these regions are going to have to work on shared services plans for regional roading authorities, one-stop shops for building, shared CCOs and things like that, potential amalgamation of smaller councils. That's all in what they said on the day. But it got missed and was only reported on about 4 days later when no one was paying attention because everyone was going, yay, no regional council rates, which is going to be a really big shock next year when they all have to pay regional council rates. Oh, I thought these guys were abolished. No, not yet. So this regional council thing is, it's about a longer term amalgamation. And it sets some boundaries of control. And there are questions about democratic representation. Say, if you had a Canterbury Regional Council, how would that work? Would you have a North Canterbury, unitary, a Christchurch super city, which has Waimakariri and all that, and then a South Canterbury one based out of, I don't know, Selwyn, Timaru, maybe? Because you couldn't just have one for the whole of Canterbury. But what the government again have done, like they've done with Waters, is go, that's up to you guys to work out. You make the plan over 2 years, then you give it to us, and we will check it. And if it's good, we'll give it a big tick. We might ask you to make some changes, or we might appoint someone to do your plan for you. It's exactly the same framework as local water done well. Down to the language in the consult document is the same about local choice. But there are much bigger questions here because this isn't just about who's fixing the pipes. This is about who's representing you locally and how does that work? Because
one of the big, I don't know, like red flags is, okay, we're going to go from regional councils to the mayors just sitting together. And I feel like New Zealand's mayors are some of the worst people in the country. And I'm not sure that that's the best way to get good representation. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Well,
That's a
it does
terrible.
depend on the boundaries, doesn't it? I think it's exactly what John says is about how do you divide it up, because that is really going to determine the sort of the influences. And it's going to be the same people involved in this sort of going forward. Maybe I can talk about that more when we talk about mega ministries. But I think like Canterbury is an interesting case in particular because it's a very large region, sort of geographically. And it's sort of both very separate and also very kind of grouped together, and has this backstory of ECAN and the sort of Stephen Joyce, John Key, anti-democratic chaos that happened a few years back, which is still a real sore point. And I think I think it's Newsroom published a piece on they had their last regional council meeting for the year a couple of days ago, and it was utter chaos. Because we're talking about being hit over the head with this stuff. These are people who are just like actually like basically receiving these messages directly from the government, and the future is very up in the air, and so they're sitting there having massive arguments about whether they should do anything or not, and whether they should make the decisions that they came into the room to make the decisions on, or to defer it to next year, and it sort of spiraled into total chaos. And I just thought that was a sort of a real indication, I guess, of like one situation that both has a lot to say about kind of water, but also just maybe what is going to ripple out over the whole country. And this is just a more kind of public and visible level of it, because the negotiation between water users in Canterbury and the authorities is very intense and very controversial. And I feel like that's just a sort of a good sort of indication of like it's not just about the residents in the metropolitan areas and the questions around water metering, which is another thing we didn't really talk about that, but something that New Zealand just doesn't do. People have sort of been against it for I don't know why for decades. And I think Auckland is perhaps the place where things have developed a little bit more rationally over the years. So perhaps Auckland is going to, and Watercare is going to be the gold standard, and perhaps not. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with a lot of those details, but I think there's a lot of shocks coming to the system around how do things like that get rolled out. But then, as I was saying, we have this situation of these private landowners who have huge demands on like water, and there's irrigation and there's rivers and watersheds and all of the sort of land use that's all connected. And so you can see like even just trying to describe it is really difficult and complicated. But I think we are sort of grappling with trying to put all of this together, because water is the common kind of thread of life that goes through all communities, and it is all connected. And it's very fascinating that that's such a component of the traditional Māori philosophy, very, very clearly sort of culturally ascribed in the language and the understanding. And you can just see the echoes of how that goes through Pākehā bureaucracy in this really fucked up way. But it's kind of like everyone is recognizing it and just interpreting it in completely different ways. I think it's going to be interesting to see in January and February if these regional councils, completely go off the rails, or how they turn around and actually kind of face what's going on, and some of the sort of public statements that might be made.
Well, we're in a position where water metering or volumetric charging is going to be the standard in the whole country, because that's part of the water reforms. Is you've got to find a way to actually charge for water properly, individually for households. And yeah, Auckland's got meters. Kapiti Coast also has metering, and they put it in about 15 years ago, and it cost the mayor her job at the time. And then they put the meters in, and everyone's water charges dropped by 25% because everyone got a bit more careful about usage. And it's, well, we've never done it this way. It's like, well, perhaps we need to. I'm a bit of a water evangelist on this stuff, because having looked through this stuff, I kind of look at it and go, it is incredible that we don't lose hundreds of people a year due to how shitty some of our water networks are in this country.
Yeah, we've had a pretty good run of getting away with it. Aside from the situation Kyle mentioned, which has been the most high profile, but living in the Canterbury region, there have been, like the Waimate district in particular, there are constant boil water notices all over the country, but particularly in some of these regional, sort of rural areas. It's just an
Gore, was
ongoing
it Gore
problem.
earlier this year where
Yeah,
they didn't have drinkable water for a week because the nitrate levels just spiked suddenly, and they were like, "Yeah, we'll investigate," and it's just like, "Yeah, cool."
but in the
It's
meantime, people can't drink water.
Yeah, and it's just crazy. But these discussions at regional council level is amazing, really. Like not 3, 4, 5 weeks after there's been maybe $1 million or more spent on elections, saying to all these newly elected people, just to let you know, fuck you, fuck everyone who voted for you, and within a couple of years, we're going to abolish you all. There's also, because it's this government, a race angle, which is last year, I believe, Simeon Brown went to ECAN and said, hey, you and I think Western Bay of Plenty have got local bills that you raised and put through Parliament to allow for Maori representation on your regional councils. Yeah, because it's government policy not to do that anymore, I want you to actually announce you want to repeal those bills. And both councillors went, fuck you, no, you can't make me. And constitutionally, he's not allowed to tell them what to do, and they don't have to. With the abolition of ECAN and the abolition of the Western Bay of Plenty Council and their replacement with these combined territory boards of mayors, that legislation becomes defunct. So they found a way to get Maori representation out, and the language in the consult document for the regional council reforms says specifically, you know, well, as the mayors were elected for their regions, that counts as Maori representation because Maori voted for mayors. That's that's the
Which
game,
was one of
you
the
know.
most ludicrous pieces of PR I've seen this year, and
It's
it's a big pull.
yeah, and it's just you can see them looking at it and going, well, you know, if we can't get you to do what we want, which let's face it, the government have had a lot of fights with regional councillors going, actually, no, you can't tell me what to do, and they're right. The government's gone, right, we'll just get rid of you then. It will be easier to manage squabbling mayors than regional councils.
Well, they're more likely to be corrupt as well, given, as I stated earlier, the state of New Zealand's mayors. Um, But I think it's something that really can't be understated or overstated, whichever way around that works. Just how much this attack on Maori, on indigeneity, on indigenous control and community in the regions in particular is a specific policy threat of the current government, especially with acting New Zealand First in there as well. Very direct risk to their project.
Perhaps that's one of the reasons why the sequencing of these reforms is so incoherent, because the sort of the broad kind of bipartisan consensus on the directional change might be kind of well understood, and it's particularly through the high levels of the kind of policy advice that the ministers are getting, where there is a bit of continuity from Labor into the current government on some of these issues, but the ministers are so obsessed with this power and control that they are making these executive decisions in order to remove people that they don't like, in order to have this long-term plan to disentangle democracy from the regions by just kind of getting rid of democracy. And I think, when you have that motivation and that mindset as an executive, you are not paying attention to sort of strategy. You're not thinking about ordering things in a sequence. You're thinking about what do I need to do in order to get political control. And it's just not a recipe for smart decision making. Putting all
It's
the partisan stuff aside, it's just a really dumb way to do things of this scale.
Yeah, it's completely the wrong way round. If you wanted to create, say, 17 unitary councils for the whole country, you do that first. Then you get everyone within a certain area to go, right, one water company for you, thank you. And everyone goes, oh yeah, that makes sense because it's within the boundaries. Got it, understand. You know, there'll be catchments involved there. Great, fine. Then you go, right, and RMA reform is we'll have a plan just for each area. And at that point, people go, all of these lines on the map actually line up with each other. I can see that this looks kind of rational. It makes sense to do it this way. Do you know what I mean? Purely from a making it so that it looks good on a map. You know what I mean? That all the lines, whereas now what you've got is a fragmented water system And then they're also asking the people who've created the fragmented water system to create a new model for local government for kind of unitary regional district, you know, because what we're talking about here with the regional reorganization is not just the abolition of regional councils, it's eventually the abolition of district councils and territorial authorities, the 1989 set. Because if you're talking about amalgamating smaller councils, there's a lot of central North Island councils that will be going, well, I'm not sure about this. I'm pretty certain our old friend Morgan Godfrey, who's currently chief executive of a council in the North Island, is looking over his shoulder right now and going, oh, yeah, this isn't great. But then you've got your big metros. You're not gonna, the government aren't gonna tell Dunedin what to do. They're unlikely to tell Queenstown what to do. They're not going to tell Christchurch what to do. Nelson's fine because they've got the immortal God Emperor Nick Smith in charge. You've got Wellington, the coastal ones in the bay are fine because they're just small and no one cares about them. But your big cities, say your big five, like Auckland, Hamilton, Wellington, Christchurch, Dunedin, and let's put Queenstown in there, so let's call it a big six. Those are the ones the government are like, right, you guys just get on with it, but we've got to deal with the regions because we don't know how they work or we don't want them to work because every time there's a rural revolt against anything, it hits national particularly hard. And like you were saying about doing it the dumbest way possible, this RMA reform looks really fucking stupid.
I was going to say, how does that come into this now? Like, and in this theory that we're trying to craft together.
Well, I guess the first thing to point out is just going back to something that John was saying earlier about the way that these sort of failures kind of echo. Like the RMA reform is, I'm thinking about Three Waters and then stop Three Waters, and then suddenly we get the sort of the ghosts of it sort of being present, but in a really disorganized and chaotic way. And it's exactly the same with so David Parker spent 6 years focusing on RMA reforms, and Labor actually got these two bills through, did not communicate them at all to the public in a scale that sort of reflected the long-term public obsession with the RMA. Because there's a whole backstory
Mark,
to that.
Mark, you're wrong. What they did was they promised too much and delivered too little. It will. I heard the guy who wants to be prime minister say that was Labour's problem. It wasn't that they did manage to overhaul the RMA but couldn't fucking explain it to save their lives. It wasn't that they had a perfectly workable water scheme but couldn't explain it to save their fucking lives. It couldn't possibly be that they are just failing to communicate on a basic level about the things they did do right, and instead went, "Oh no, don't shout at me."
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
I
so
think,
we
I think you're
got
right.
basically the public didn't understand what had happened, and which is, I think, a key kind of component because we've basically lost 2 years of progress by just going around in circles, and then we have these two bills going through that are sort of again kind of shambolic, sort of vestigial, sort of fragments of what had previously been done, of like 2 years of like fucking around. But of course, there's a whole bunch of national specific ideology in the new ones. Very particular things which probably take us more into the territory of talking about privatization and sort of private property rights and all of that kind of stuff. But I think like my perspective on it might be a bit different to a lot of people because I have been reading about the sort of the RMA stuff for like a long time, just in terms of the populism around it. And I feel like what is sort of accepted, that's sort of tacitly accepted across politics and certainly in the media, is the kind of underpinning values of the RMA from the Rogernomics time period and the early 90s. This was put in place by Simon Upton, but the foundations were actually put in place by that fourth Labor government.
It
And
was
Simon
Jeff
Upton,
Palmer, wasn't it?
it was Palmer, yeah. And it was, a big achievement, but like essentially we haven't deviated from those values. I think that we are still talking about basically the fundamental like thing that we have to organize the country's planning around is sort of private property being the kind of supreme sort of virtue and the most important kind of rights that we need to basically offset that against any and we have this idea that we have to have like limits. So we have to have these that encapsulate all the impacts and future of kind of change that we might be planning for in this idea of like environmental limits. And that hasn't gone away. Like we still have that ideology of like how to do planning, where like for one thing, there's this assumption that we can actually like understand impacts and limits, and we can kind of set these values in a coherent way, which is not at all clear to me. We have these kind of systemically connected, like complicated situations, often really poorly understood, and we're certainly as a country not exactly funding the science and technology to understand these things adequately. But that's the sort of broad set of kind of values that are driving this. And what we have now is basically a continuation of that, but it's just shifted the goalposts quite drastically. And it's really just like kind of the populist aspect of it is just about avoiding consents, like reducing the so-called kind of burden of like consents. And then there's this other stuff that's kicked in, which maybe you guys will have some more interesting thoughts than me on around this concept of regulatory takings, which is an extreme sort of George Mason University libertarian sort of economic theory concept from the 70s and 80s. It was part of the Regulatory Standards Bill, which there was a huge public outcry against. And now it's just imprinted in the successor to the RMA, where this compensation for regulatory takings being kind of prescribed.
So if a council sets up a spatial plan, a landowner can demand compensation because of the impact that regulating the land by putting a zone over it, for instance. If there's an economic impact on them, they can claim that money back from whichever authority is responsible for the plan. That's kind of what I've heard on this, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Now, the problem with that, like, having read through a couple of the new documents and read the briefing papers on this one, you know how I said they made the water reform fast and badly? This RMA has been made fast and badly. And as Mark rightly said, they did just get the Labour policies, Control F, Maori, delete, and then cut out anything that even looked like it gave a shit about the environment, and then ran it through a shredder, and then had a couple of monkeys try and sellotape it back together. The only thing the current RMA, the stuff that they're consulting on right now, is probably good for is ensuring that every lawyer in this country owns 17 houses by 2030, because there are so many holes in this thing and so many definitions about, well, it would only be consented if there would be an impact on neighbors if you're doing it on your property, and that kind of impact on the adjoining properties. And you're like, right, how the fuck are you defining that? Do you know what I mean? Like all pollution standards and regulatory, there's going to be a lot of regulation that's going to be set by, I don't know, some kind of mega ministry, which the act will define. And there's some really fucking weird feedback loops between consents or actions taken, which feed back into the spatial plan and the regulatory taking stuff as well, which means the plan itself keeps changing and moving as people keep doing things in the land that the spatial plan works for. As far as I'm aware, it's hideously complex.
Yeah, they haven't solved those sorts of issues. I mean, maybe they are unsolvable, but I think it's just very, very. Again, it's another example of the sort of ass backwards sort of like sequencing of things where they've decided in advance that they need to do something about this bad RMA, because the RMA is this sort of handbrake on growth and all of this sort of rhetoric around that, and particularly to do with the housing crisis, and that rhetoric seems to work, because I feel like people really struggle to engage with the complexity of land use and planning. And it's very contested in this country, particularly, impact of colonization on this country has had a lot to do with current patterns of sort of spatial development and land use. And there's a lot of unfinished business there's, a lot of Waitangi Tribunal claims that have not been seen yet. There's a lot of contested and controversial decisions about farming and irrigation, as we were talking about before. All of the stuff is just there together. And so when people talk about the RMA, it's sort of like an umbrella term for sort of gesturing at this ball of stuff that's kind of too difficult for sort of the mere mortal humans to comprehend.
I want to push back on one thing around it being unsolvable. I think there is a solution. That's just abolish private property, and then we don't have to worry about this shit.
Yeah, but then we have to worry about a whole host of other
Different thing,
things,
different things.
Yeah, like where are you going to get a guillotine at this time of day? Um,
yeah,
but you're right about you're absolutely right about it is the RMA is shorthand for it feels like we can't get anything done in this country. But that's usually because the forces of reaction stop anything good happening
Yeah.
because they want to continue squeezing everything until it breaks, like they're breaking the RMA. I just want to kind of tie the RMA stuff into the regional council thing because an unnoticed statement by Minister Chris Bishop, a man who constantly looks like he's got his hand stuck in a pickle jar, he said just after they announced the regional reforms, look, you'll understand why unitary councils make sense when you see the RMA reforms. And the RMA reforms talk about 17 spatial plans. That number is there. And I just want to imagineer for a minute here. Let's just imagine. The RMA will be fully in place and active by 1st of July 2029. Okay, they want to get this stuff passed so quickly and start running it up to about 2029 to 2030, right? The 1st of July 2029 is also when the rates capping starts properly. The 1st of July 2029 is also when all of the regional reorganization plans that those boards of mayors are going to put together are due to the government. 2029 is going to be the new 1989. It's the one where all of this government's planned reforms for local government and all of these policies it all kicks in around the same time. And there's also the political dimension here. This is a fuck ton of reform. And it's exactly the kind of reform package that if you were going into a general election next year on the back of zero growth in a few years and thousands of people out of work, if you wanted to go, let us finish the job by giving us another term, these reforms are what I would bank on. I would say, look, we're going to fix all of these problems, but if you let those guys in, they're going to stop it. Okay? And then in 2029, when you have your election, you go, look, we did the thing. Give us another term and we'll, I don't know, a statue of David Seymour in every home. Winston Peters gets a Gundam. I'm not sure, but
like the old Muldoon head piggy banks in the 1970s.
yeah. Like everybody gets a piece of Winston in their house because he'll be dead by then, surely. Considering my I hate Winston Peters line on this podcast, but just all of these reforms are aimed at 2029. Okay, and that's something really important to remember because a lot of this stuff isn't going to actually kick in for another year or two at least. Regional councils are going to be around until the 1st of July 2027 when they start getting replaced. 1st July 2027 is also when all the water CCOs start up, and the year after 2029 is when all of those water services plans are due for all of the councils who didn't do what the government want. Okay, there is a long line here of things that are going to happen. But the next 12 months are about making the legislation which will govern all of that stuff. And it is going to be made quickly and badly, which means that later on down the line, we are going to find massive problems in the restructuring of local government. And that's without even talking about how democratic representation at a local level is going to be subsumed by, say, the Ministry for Cities, Environment, Regions and Transport.
Bit of a theme here developing.
The meth ministry or whatever it's been dubbed on social media.
The Ministry of Silly Walks.
Yeah. That one is interesting because I think it's perhaps an example of. I think there's a lot going on with this long-term plan. I don't really know a lot about sort of the internal politics in Wellington and what's driving some of these kind of discussions. In the detailed sense. If only there was a sort of a parliamentary press gallery whose job it was to actually surface these kinds of strategic conversations and plans and kind of talk about that and convey it to the general public. But anyway, we can wish cast.
We can dream. Wouldn't it be great if there was an opposition which actually asked serious questions about these plans instead of going, well, we'll have to see what they look like, but it would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would give the press gallery something to report on.
Oh no, I think we want to see a bit more
settings.
Continuity. Is that this new line out of Labour recently for a bunch of stuff? Oh no, you don't want to keep flipping back and forth. We need to get some.
Don't like it.
No,
Chris Hipkins putting the cunt in continuity.
But yeah, I think that there has been a theme that has been discussed, beyond a lot of these regional reforms and these questions around water. There have been a lot of people in those sort of bureaucratic, kind of administrative state spheres of influence, talking about this over the last few months. I think most notably, the New Zealand Initiative put out a report in September. I don't know if report is the right word for their publications, but at least, their forerunner, the Business Roundtable, never actually kind of publicized their documents and only provided them to the inner circles. But, one of the things that is good is that this stuff is now published and available on the internet, so we can all go read it. And I had a read of it the other day because I thought that maybe there's going to be some interesting stuff here. And I guess that the common theme is this idea of that the New Zealand executive is too complicated. The title of this report is Unscrambling Government. And they talk about how there's like 41 different ministries and executive functions, and they show these kind of diagrams of ministerial lines of responsibility. And I guess there's two major kind of touch points that they look at. Is they focus a lot on Norway. Norway is a kind of similar sized sort of democratic state with a sort of roughly similar kind of scope of regions and centralized cities. And they look a lot at the Bob Hawke reforms in Australia, which kind of boiled down their ministries to 10 or 16 kind of core government functions. And they propose a bunch of sort of ways that New Zealand could go about doing this. So on that end of the spectrum, you have this kind of discussion about, the executive is too complicated. Ministers are basically getting portfolios and ministries set up for political reasons rather than sort of sensible governance reasons. And I think some of that does make sense, but I think what's interesting is the stuff that gets left out. As always, there's a sort of I think it's always. And everyone writing about this or talking about these issues always says the same thing, like the devil is in the details. But it's just it's like, well, let's talk about the details. Like, how are you going to do this? Like, I think how these things are done is actually more important than the structure. But, it is very easy for these sort of armchair theory people, and I guess people like us as well, particularly me and Kyle, who like to come up with these kind of galaxy brain schemes and say this could fix it. Here's this beautiful model of like how we organize the executive better, and now suddenly ministers have these kind of very simple reporting lines, and we boil down all of this complicated swath of sort of Wellington organizations to a set of like 16 or 20 mega ministries that have a direct line to a cabinet minister. And there's accountability and there's kind of clarity. But in order to do that, you have to make decisions about what goes into these particular areas. And I think, that's where the detail comes in. But again, this is an example of, okay, so there's this conversation taking place. And it's, I will say as well, like Brian Roche is another person who's come out publicly and said, we need to deal with this kind of thing, although he had a much more cooked. And it's kind of remarkable that I'm saying that he was more cooked than the New Zealand Initiative.
He's not been covering himself with glory this year.
I was about to say, yeah. So Brian Rush, I mean, like, if you wanted to do like an end of year award for like least successful 2025 in terms of reputation, like the way he's been moving in terms of public sector organizations and strikes is like. Did he get told that he got to be like a 1920s fucking Pinkerton or something? Because he's like fully... Well, no, it's perfectly fine for the Public Service Commission to run ads attacking striking workers. That's fine.
That's neutral. That's neutral, actually.
I've got a knighthood. I can do what I like.
Yeah. Like, well, his take on the mega ministry thing was that the government departments are not uptaking AI fast enough.
What?
What?
Yeah.
What?
I mean, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but that was one of the key findings of his report. So that's why I said it's more cooked than the New Zealand Initiative. Like, they at least admitted the kind of limitations to their analysis and what they were doing as a suggestion. But he's just like, one of the key aspects of this inefficiency is that they're not uptaking AI fast enough. And I think that's what, I guess, from my perspective as as a technologist and design and software engineering expert, I think is one of the funniest things about all of these suggestions is that a lot of it does seem to be about kind of not wanting to admit, but kind of accepting that the government has completely fucked up like technology procurement and is spending like colossal sums of money, just leaking money, to Microsoft and all these other big corporate IT providers and getting very little value. But all of their solutions are classic, like 1990s and kind of early 2000s sort of big corporate IT blunders. And they're just sleepwalking into that exact kind of same state. And they're talking about, just like kind of platitudes about like if we amalgamate these things, then we reduce costs because we reduce duplication. And that's been used as a justification for failed IT projects for decades. And it's just, they're setting up these kind of conditions. And I think that's why we see Bishop struggling so much to articulate the sort of justification. And he keeps going back to these kind of same simplified sort of like common sense explanations. But if you unpick the various explanations, it always kind of grounds out in these same things. Like this has been something that's been said over and over, and we've seen it basically fail massively at scale because you can amalgamate all these complicated functions into one very clean kind of executive structure, but you're just sweeping that complexity under the rug if you're not dealing with the actual complexity. So something that might look nice as an org chart does not reflect the actual communication lines and the power and communication sort of entangled with power that's going on in terms of decision making. And I think that also goes back to the RMA that one of the themes is focus on speed rather than quality. But they always say we want quality. We want quality and we want speed. And we want it to be cheap. And that yet again, that's another infamous IT sort of failure mode, which is
That's not
known
even
as
a choose two triangle. That's a choose one triangle.
Yeah, well, it's like the iron triangle is sort of starting to be discussed in Wellington as well, which is really funny to me. Like it's taken this long for them to figure it out, but they still realize that they can't go to the public and sort of say that we have to compromise. And so the compromises become these kind of half-assed, sort of chaotic kind of accidents that happen. And I think, there's probably a creepy aspect to this ministry of like all transport and planning and housing and the end of the Ministry for the Environment. There's the creepy aspect would be, there's very explicit corporate sort of focus on delivering these outcomes long term. And I think there's also a chaotic aspect to it with just ass backwards, like incoherent, shambolic, New Zealand governance. And I think we're seeing a mix of these things at the moment, which is it's not great.
It feels like some of the efficiencies that they're talking about as well, such as they are just about, no, we just want to destroy this thing, right? Like, instead of having ministries that might be at odds with each other, the minister of the day can subvert or subsume the needs of one of these areas in favor of the one that they want to boost. So, hey, we want to put a road through here. There might be some environmental concerns. No, there aren't.
Yeah, I mean that's the anti-democratic sort of authoritarian side of the National Party coming through in particular, and I think that has been one of the other justifications from Bishop, is that there's too much conflicting advice, and
Yeah.
it's like isn't that
Which
what
is an absurd
democracy
thing to
is?
say. That's an
Like
absurd thing to say.
isn't that the whole point?
It's not even
And
just it's not
then
even just
not being able
democracy.
to synthesize that as a skill issue as a leader,
Yeah.
it really is.
It's not even just a democracy issue, right? Like
Have a
it's
think about
a
this ministry, though. Just have a think about this ministry. It is going to put together some of the biggest ministries this country's got under one minister. But that minister is going to need several junior ministers to run each individual bit of it. So they're kind of doing a matryoshka government, like a little, just a New Zealand government just for internal affairs.
well, who do you think those associate ministers are going to come? Like, what party are they going to come from? Like, given how we've seen,
David Seymour, Transport Minister. It's going to be
this is
monorails all the way down.
like absolutely right. This is how the minister associate minister format has worked throughout this government as a way to it's not even Trojan horse, right? Like I don't even know, like it's so overt Like, okay, associate minister of this, like, what is it that Brooke Van Velden is? Like, workplace relations, or she's just actually just the
She's
minister of
also
that?
internal affairs
You
because she
know,
does the intros to citizenship ceremonies, which
associate,
must make everyone reconsider immediately. Eh? Like,
associate minister
welcome.
of,
Ah!
associate minister of education for Seymour, right, has been incredibly damaging to the education sector and to the future of the children of this country. They've got what Todd Stevenson and associate doing Pharmac stuff. This is the guy who, before the
Hoggard,
election, went on to
Hoggard's the environment guy, isn't
yeah,
he?
environment,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's the guy who was at Field Days in 2023 and went, oh, everyone might as well stop doing their district plans because we're going to tell them to stop. And the next day had to put out a media statement going, obviously I don't have the power to do that or instruct
Yeah.
councils to do anything. And I was obviously taken out of context. And it's like you're on camera, Andrew. You're talking into the microphone. It's not even disguised as a flower, buddy.
Yeah.
Federated farmers need to brush up their media training.
No, they don't
Although
though.
not anymore, do they? Because they can just do this shit.
However, this isn't gonna work. Like it's not gonna not work in like just a regular way, but it's also not gonna work in the people who kind of assumed that if they got rid of three waters, then there would be a solution for waters that would cost no money but fix everything. Because kind of that's what they were promised, local control, and they're not getting it. Are gonna be mad as shit about this. When people realize that the local democracy in this country is going to be turned into maybe 12 councillors per region and a load of kind of local board-esque kind of things running the towns, they're not going to be happy about that either. The water charges are going to go up because they're not under a rates cap. They're not going to be happy about that. This RMA is not going to deliver what fed farmers want because it's still, as Marcus said, grappling with a problem that is much bigger than what feds want. It has some of their language, but they're not going to like it anyway. Some of the natural hazard stuff and the provisions that are there are going to make certain bits of land completely fucking uninsurable in this country. And that's a massive problem because, land is where the money comes from, right? It's the thing you squeeze and pour nitrates into until there's nothing left. And eventually it's just not going to work in the way that people think it does. But EMSA, like if you're doing this big ministry and it's effectively a new ministry for every kind of local government, it's the government side of local government. This amalgamation is saying to every council, unitary council, city in the country, we can amalgamate to streamline and reduce duplication and all of that. And that's what we expect you to do. We don't want to deal with 67 councils anymore. We want to deal with a number less than 20. And it's up to you guys to work that out because if you don't, this ministry will do it for you. Royal Commissioners, ECAN all over again, Tauranga all over again, except they will be making decisions about, removing layers of local democracy representation so that whoever the minister and the associate ministers of the day are can effectively rule by fiat. And apparently, given what we know of this week, the only thing that may be standing in their way is the judiciary. And good on the judiciary this week. Nelson Tenths, lovely. All the other decisions, including some which I think may be an episode of 1 in 200 soon, lovely. They've also released that regulatory impact statement that we were waiting for, Kyle.
Oh, which one?
The
Oh,
one,
they did.
Yeah, that's out now. I've just seen it pop up
Publicly.
on my feed. Yeah, well, buried in a PDF on page 29 of thingy.
Yeah.
But sorry, just this is all a moving feast. But we've seen this week that a lot of what this government does is simply unlawful, and if you challenge it hard enough, they get pinged.